Hello, Republic of Gamers, and welcome to ROG Sidequest, the podcast where we dive in and talk about all things gaming. This week, we are talking about the pursuit of loot, all things action RPGs, loot shooters, you name it. There's so many of them. There's a lot of historic ones. There's a bunch of stuff on the horizon, and there's a lot to talk about. My name is Solid Jake, and this week, we've got Feigned. We've got JJ. JJ, actually, I didn't ask you, do you have a different gamer tag, or is JJ what you go by? Is that your handle?
It depends. I like to try to keep it stealthy sometimes when I'm on different types of games because I've been around the community for so long. So I don't want everybody to always know when I'm playing. But generally, if I'm standard, I would probably say it's some variant of something with Krypton because I'm a big comic book fan. So I've usually got something in there. Or sometimes I'll have Starmore, which is also kind of a throwback to a really cool kind of niche comic character as well. So depends on what I'm playing, where I'm playing.
Very cool. Well, JJ, welcome to the show for the first time. Why don't you just briefly tell us about what you do here at ASUS?
Man, I've been done a little bit of everything. I've been with the company for just about almost 15 years, so pretty good chunk of time. So I've done everything from our kind of technical PR role to technical marketing to assist product marketing, community-based engagement and evangelism, and a whole lot of video and a whole lot of live streams. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what I really do is try to interface with our users, the community as a whole, collect their feedback, their opinions, their insights, and then collaborate with our team to hopefully put out the best products that we can. That's really what it comes down to.
And here we are to just chat about video games. That's got to be a different spin. It's your first time being paid to sit down and talk video games, isn't it? Or no?
Maybe it's not. But I think that's one of the cool things about being, working for ASUS and definitely, having ROG, right? Is that a pursuit of a lot of this hardware is ultimately about a gaming experience. So it's pretty fun.
It's true.
Chris, what's new, man? It's been a few weeks.
Or I guess it I was on here last week.
Man, time
it feels like a few weeks.
This month has been.
That's just how life is these days. Man, it's. I'm buried in snow out there right now. Like I got up and it's just a ton of snow.
That's what's happening here.
I don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
Not for much longer. That's how I'm doing it.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the desert.
People, it's like they gotta shovel things out, and I'm just like, man, it's a whole nother world, man.
Right?
Yeah, it's.
I'm gonna dig myself out. It's all good.
It's snowing like 5 out of 7 days this week here, so that's the life. Yay, getting my exercise. But guys, just jumping right in. So when we talk about what an action RPG is, loot shooter, etc., I mean, we tend to define that as games where your objective is to essentially grind for specific gear that will fit your play style or things that you want to. Now, growing up, a lot of people have different first experiences. I think a common first experience for people is Diablo 1 or Diablo 2. For me, the first game was a game called Phantasy Star Online on the Sega Dreamcast. This was, I grew up with I have 3 brothers, so 4 boys in one house, 1 PC in the house back in the 90s. It wasn't a whole lot of time to game on the PC, but consoles were, I had a Dreamcast to myself, so that was kind of my outlet. But how about you, Chris? What was your first loot experience?
It's gonna be Diablo. It was I still remember getting my copy of Diablo. It was I actually visited an aunt and uncle to go see the Phantom Menace back in '99.
Oh jeez.
And I was staying the night at their house. They lived far away, and they were gonna take me to the midnight showing and all that. I was like, yes. And they had a computer that I looking through their games and stuff, and I saw this one with this just like demon on the front cover, and I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh yeah, we got that game and we never got around to playing it. Do you want it? And I was like, Diablo? Sure. I'm hiding this from my parents and taking it home. And I got it installed on my PC, and I was like, this is the next thing for me as far as video games goes, because I was playing Super Nintendo and N64, that kind of stuff. It was exciting time for gaming, but this was something new, the concept of loot. And so that was really a new kind of concept in gaming for me, as far as unique loot. It wasn't specified, you defeat this enemy, you get this piece of whatever. It's, you never know what you're gonna get, and that was the draw for me.
JJ, how about you?
Definitely Diablo resonates also for me, but I think as far as what really maybe was a catalyst to help to kind of spur the interest in this type of, I think, gameplay experience, I probably gravitate a little bit towards things that had a little bit kind of more story that kind of drove the reason why I was grinding in the game. And so it would probably actually be Neverwinter Nights, and then probably actually Final Fantasy VII, because in a lot of ways, right, you still had a lot of kind of loot, and there was kind of that mechanization of trying to affect your gameplay experience, but in the pursuit of trying to get deeper into the world, right, to progress and kind of find out more what was going on. But I think definitely from kind of a traditional sense, from kind of a loot or kind of a dungeon crawler, for sure, Diablo was in that mix as well.
Yeah, I think about loot shooters. The other thing that stands out to me is Phantasy Star was my first real online gaming experience where I was actively logging into a world with other players where we could work together for a common goal, right? If we all wanted to farm a specific boss, my friends and I could get on and together we could all do that. And to me, I mean, this was before I got into any kind of MMO. It's kind of bridging that line of being, just kind of a dungeon crawler, but also almost an MMO. And some of the modern games that we look like that kind of may have taken some inspiration from these kind of loot systems, like Destiny, do even call themselves an MMO. And that's when it, to me, what is an MMO, right? How massive does it have to be qualified as an MMO? It's an interesting conversation, but so let's just kind of.
I think that's a great topic for another show.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
MMOs.
We could really do. We should.
The lines have been blurring definitely for the last few years. Not even the last few years, maybe really kind of the last decade, right? It's just continuing to kind of. So many games are now cross-influencing each other, and kind of the overall dynamics and gameplay experience is really, unless they're kind of focused at really trying to have a kind of on the rails type of concept, it's definitely trying to get a little bit harder to keep specifying, right, with clarity, saying it's exactly this type of gameplay experience.
It's true. We can actually talk even on that point, because just speaking about this kind of isometric top-down game, we have Magic Legends is a newer game that's been announced. It's going into beta March 24th, give or take. And that's a game when they first announced it with like no footage, no gameplay or anything, they called it an MMO. And everybody was like, yes, this is awesome. So I actually went to PAX East last year, and I went to the booth. They had the game there. And the first thing I asked the guy while I'm waiting in line, one of the staffers on the game, I was like, so is this game actually an MMO? And he's like, well, and they've since kind of like backpedaled because, what actually is an MMO. And that is a game where you're restricted to 4 players per game. So in my opinion, that is like the classic Diablo experience. That's what Diablo 3 is. You have 4 players on a server, you're running around together. That's not quite an MMO. However, Diablo 4, we're just going to kind of ramble around Diablo right now. Diablo 4 is going to break that whole MMO experience. There is a world map. So how much do you guys know about Diablo 4? Have you guys done any video watching last year at BlizzCon? Did you guys watch the cinematic? Did you guys watch any gameplay?
Yeah, the cinematic. Of course, you got to watch the cinematics, right?
You got to watch the cinematics.
That's like a requirement.
It was a beautiful
gameplay. I haven't
really. Okay.
Like I honestly, I got burned with 3 when it initially came out, which we can talk about that later.
Well, no, we can talk about it right now. Why'd you get burned by 3?
I honestly, when I was hyped for 3, because 2 was one of my favorite games of all time, I put so many hours into that. 3 came out and it was missing the magic of it. There was just something, I don't know. I got to the end of it, I beat Diablo, and I was like, huh, okay. And I left. And I think a lot of it was tied into what they were trying to do with the Real Money Auction House.
Okay, I was going to say, because that's where I got burned, because
it took away the magic of looting. It took away the magic of seeking out items. It took out the magic when you could just literally go plop down some money and pay for an item. And I knew a lot of people that were trying to do the reverse, which was grind to make money. So
I was a college student.
Yeah,
I was a college student, and I was playing the game, and I was like, "There's real money I can earn here." The maximum sale value was $200, I believe, in the game, which was lower than it should have been, in my opinion. But and I remember flipping, and I made $400 or $500 on the game. But I do also remember spending like $200, because I'm like, okay, well, if I have better gear, I can farm more efficiently. And then they nerfed everything I bought, the entire set I bought, and that's when I was like, this is stupid.
You can't have a game where you can actually you're encouraged and it's allowed to pay real money for an item that the devs at any point can nerf. Like that's just it was never going to work in the way they were trying to do it. I think that was an interesting idea. I don't know that Diablo was the game to do it with, but once they stepped back, they took, a lot of feedback. They got rid of the real money auction house. They brought in the rifts, and they really added new reasons to get back to the game and do that gameplay loop again that was fun and exciting. And for me, at the beginning, after I got done with 3, I was just like, I don't see a reason to play it again. And that was really disheartening coming from 2, where the first thing I did after I beat Diablo was go back and start again. It was just like, okay, well now, I see what kind of gear I can get. And it just, I'm already thinking about, what I can do with my necromancer. And there wasn't even a necromancer in 3 when it came out.
Do you think, though, that your perception was affected by the fact that you kind of had a different perception in terms of what you were looking for in terms of the gameplay experience based on the age when you played the game? Right?
That's entirely possible. I think, though, it recaptured a lot of that when I came back to it again after they had made the changes. It felt more like what I remember, in 2000, wherever I was playing, 2. And it I don't know. When I played 3 originally, like I didn't even care to play with my friends that much. It wasn't even like that. Like, hey guys, let's go run and do this. It just
my experience was totally polar opposite to that.
Yeah, me too.
That's totally fair. I'm curious to hear your experiences.
Everybody, I think they approach sometimes games from a different kind of narrative, right? How much they want to engage. I think maybe if you were really kind of connected to online, or you had that pursuit that you maybe wanted to kind of sell stuff, you wanted to do things in that mechanic, it became a much bigger point of relevancy, right? And I think that when you talk about the community as a whole and their conversation at why that was a critical point, it makes sense why that was a kind of hot button item, right? Because it's in line with what that kind of community was focused in on. But for me, the first thing I'm always looking for within a gameplay experience is always kind of the nuts and bolts, right? Is the gameplay, the mechanics, the animation, the world environment, are those things solid enough for me to want to maintain spending, hours playing a game, right? And I think that even at the very beginning, I found that right off the bat, and it was really enjoyable for me, right? And I think that the overall experience I had was really enjoyable. But I definitely agree that, the auction house was an area that definitely needed improvement and resolution over time. But I think that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Is that it's hard to try to make something work for an entire range of individuals, right? And so when games, I think, tend to kind of be a little bit more targeted in their scope, they probably tend to execute a little bit better. And when they try to go a little bit broader and wider, it becomes more problematic, right? Because you're trying to appease many voices as opposed to a little bit more of a singular focus voice, which is also, I think, probably the big challenge of what you have a lot with loot shooters in general right now, right? Is how much are you trying to bridge, trying to bring in multiple types of gamers and kind of the experiences that they're looking for, versus kind of really trying to dial in and kind of serve a specific kind of audience and a specific type of gameplay user, right? Especially when there's so many other choices that are out there.
I think Diablo had a difficult time with that because the second game was such a phenomenon. Like the first game was good, but I think the second game with online play really took off, and there were a lot of people that wanted, well, I just want Diablo 2 with better graphics and another story.
Yep.
And then you also have people saying, well, I don't just want that. I want you to push forward. I want you to push boundaries because Diablo did that, and I want to see them do it again and take it to new places. And you're always going to have those kind of conflicting groups in the community. It's just, I want more of the same and I want new. And so it was definitely tough.
Hopefully and theoretically, that's what Diablo 4 is. They're trying to achieve that same like level of complexity and the dark, gritty tones that Diablo 2 had, because Diablo 2 was way darker than Diablo 3.
It's true.
They tried to
I would agree with that.
to polish Diablo 3 up and make it a little bit more approachable to a larger audience. They really tried to smooth it over, and you can't blame them because it's a common thing. So you want to make your game just a little bit more approachable to a larger audience in a lot of situations. Also, just to step back a little bit, I think the real money auction house thing was a necessary evil. I think somebody was going to do it eventually. You think about how important these third party websites were for buying and selling items in Diablo. I mean, auctions for thousands of dollars, for a single piece of gear. Yeah, they wanted to monetize it. They wanted to control it. They wanted to monetize it. I think it was a necessary evil that somebody was going to try eventually. It didn't work. They pulled the trigger, and I don't think we'll ever see it again in an iteration quite like that. I think that's where community-driven, economies are nice, right? Because that's when the players get to choose and do their own thing on their own. But when Blizzard's, setting limitations and doing all that within the game, not great. But back to Diablo 4, here's just a little bit about what's different with Diablo 4. The game has an overall world map, which is larger. And the world map is kind of like what you'd get with Destiny, where there are world events that happen. So a giant rift could be torn and a huge demon could spawn. Now, this is like alerted to all the players. When you look at the mini map or you look at the map, you can see like, okay, this event's going to be happening in 3 minutes. We got to get there. And this is at the BlizzCon demo I got to play last year. This is like kind of where you get to run around the map and feel that MMO-esque element. There are towns where you see other players. There is PvP zones where you're going to fight other players on the world map. They are bringing PvP back. And then there are cooperative bosses where it's going to drop good loot, give good XP, but it takes like 40 players to be able to take down that boss because you're just dying left and right. Like I was playing Druid and I probably died like 8 times during that fight. So it's different experience. It's like a new game, but it feels true to the old ones. And the one other thing that really felt different and new with the experience is every action feels like you have to be a little bit more conscious of and deliberate. It's not just spam clicking your ability 1,000 times. Every action does feel a little bit more deliberate in the game, which is good because it's not just button mashing.
Yeah, no, that gets back to the bigger mechanic in loot titles in general, right? That you not only, ideally, I think the gold standard now is that you not only want cosmetic, right, but you also want gameplay experiential changes, right? So
with your
character failing out in terms of their tree or their loot, right, that you genuinely feel like you're affecting both of those, right? You want to see cosmetic progression and you want to see gameplay progression. But the only thing that I'm kind of, I don't want to say worried about there, but that Diablo 4 also does feel that that's a little bit in the vein of what we've seen over the last few years, where you're seeing games focus on releases that are targeting games as a service, right? So this kind of long-term focus is saying that you're developing the world environment and the gameplay experiences to be kind of this ongoing, consistent kind of content that has to be pumped out, right? And Blizzard has, I think, a strong enough team, of course, in terms of a lot of different areas that they can make that work. But I think that is a struggle that you have across different types of game developers, right? Where is it better to kind of pull that back and try to really make sure that the world environment, the gameplay experience, the game design, and all those kind of mechanisms are kind of really polished and implemented at the very beginning from the forefront, as opposed to saying, well, we're kind of patching these things and you're going to continue to see these things kind of roll out over time, right? And they're kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum.
It's a really good point, because we do see that done a lot of the times where it just kind of layers over time, like severely. One thing that we are seeing with Diablo that I'm interested in, and this is going to be years out, but the way the dungeons work in the game is there will be like an entrance to a dungeon on the map. And once you enter that dungeon, I think they might have raised the maximum number of players to some of them to 8, but the traditional ones are still 4. So you're going to have like there's going to be different scaling dungeons, but it's like there's so many, we in the past with like Diablo 3, you think about the affixes on an enemy. Those are the variables as to like the experience, like the different kind of enemies you run into, maybe running into a loot goblin. That's kind of like the flavor that spices things up during your run. And of course, ultimately your pursuit is for that loot. But with Diablo 4, there's like the maps themselves are going to bleed into each other. So different tile sets will bleed into a different tile set and create those variables of that tile set will determine what kind of creatures you can run into and what kind of fixes can happen. And with all those different pieces blended together, I think that's going to create a good amount of content. That's really going to feel like every time you run a dungeon, it's changing. It's randomly generated, randomly spliced together with a different mix. So that's, hopefully it's done really well, because I'm pretty stoked for it.
Have they
it
confirmed
sounds exciting.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, JJ. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just wondering, have they confirmed the actual way that the actual randomization would occur for loot? Because that's also kind of like one of these things that varies a lot in kind of games over the last couple of years, right? Is this focus of that, are you attaching kind of loot structured towards your world tiers or your levels or your classes or the environments, right? Which kind of has some logic to it, but as opposed to sometimes some games where it's 100% randomized, where I actually kind of almost prefer that. Yes, it's a little bit kind of variable, but it does bring, I think, that unexpected surprise or that experience, which is kind of part of the grind mentality, right? That you really kind of feel that you don't know what you're going to get, right?
I'm not actually sure. I think if I'm not mistaken, there will be items that are available pretty much everywhere. Like, but then there will be items that are specifically attached to certain bosses and certain runs. So if you want like the butcher's axe, you got to kill the butcher, right? And so on and so forth. So I think we'll have a good mix of both.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. That's for sure. I mean, for sure, it's going to be on a lot of people's radar. I mean, it's probably up there at the very top, right? I think it's probably one of the most anticipated titles.
Well, I mean, definitely, especially when you look at Blizzard as a company, a lot of people are being very critical. They're like, what's your next play? What's your next AAA title? They haven't launched, a new IP since Overwatch, really. Blizzard's not known to be a company that cranks out tons of new IPs. It's not what they do, or even tons of new games. They maintain their games for long periods of times. And Diablo is pushing on, Diablo 3 is 10 years old now almost? Came out when I was in college, so it's like 10 years old now. So yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, BlizzConline is like a week away, so we're going to learn more very soon, and I'm hoping that we see more classes. I guess my last Diablo related question for you guys: what class do you want to see added to Diablo 4 the most?
That's easy. You already said it, Druid.
It's already there. So you got to pick another one.
No, sorry.
You don't even care. You're just like, I got Druid, I'm good.
Nope, it's gonna be Druid.
Did they have Necromancer in 4?
No, I don't think so.
Then that's it.
Do you want Necro?
That's mine for sure. Yeah, Necro was my go-to in 2, and I was disappointed when it didn't show up at the beginning of 3. I was like, come on, I need my army of skeletons to just lay waste to everything.
Did you ever download Necro in 3?
The land. I did eventually when they got it. It was just that it was one of those disappointments at the beginning. It was just a lot of little things.
Yeah.
And your favorite character not being there was a disappointment. Like, obviously I found other people to play with. It's like, okay, I can have some fun, but
they've confirmed.
Yeah, I will say that
I missed the Necromancer at the beginning.
Yeah, I will say that I think it's cool that we're going to see, I think, a premier AAA title that is kind of more in that fantasy kind of realm in terms of, I think, the overall just kind of the world design and the kind of the gameplay experience, because shooters have kind of really been the prevalent kind of focus in a lot of different ways for most of the kind of the game environments where it's very militaristic, kind of dystopian future, right? Kind of any kind of those similar type of environments. There's a lot of kind of sci-fi mix kind of stuff in there with, I know, Jake, we were talking a little bit before the stream with stuff like Outriders is a good example of that, where they kind of got that sci-fi futuristic kind of military vibe kind of tied in there. But even another one that's coming up, which is like Witchfire, I'm really excited because you're bringing again kind of I think less focused on type of kind of worldview, gameplay, art experience into the kind of conversation. So I think that just in general for me, I'm always excited when I see a non-traditional kind of FPS centric world, because I think there's always a time that we kind of hit eventually kind of a plateau point in terms of kind of brain saturation, where it's like I've seen so many of these kind of similar type of environments that even though you have amazing game designers, set designers, so many different kind of aspects that they kind of define the world and the characters, you kind of go, this feels a lot like this, and this feels a lot like this, or this looks a lot like this. So it's refreshing sometimes when you can see something that doesn't feel and look like anything else.
It was called Wildfire. What was it called?
Witchfire.
Witchfire.
Yeah, that's gonna be it's kind of like I think what the developers are kind of pitching it as Dark Souls meets Destiny, right?
Ooh.
So you kind of like put them together, and it's really cool. But it's, like I said, a much more fantasy based environment. So I think it's going to be, I think it's cool. They've got a lot of interesting mechanics that are kind of built in there as far as the way that kind of the loot system, kind of the life system works in there. There's I think some really cool things. I'm most excited for Outriders, but that one's kind of got on my radar just because, like I said, it doesn't fit in that traditional mold of being like a classic, like I said, quintessential shooter type of scenario, which is what we're really seeing kind of most commonly for a lot of the kind of loot shooters that are coming out, right? Which gets back to your original very premise point, right, of this conversation, right, where I think loot shooters is becoming kind of the new thing, but it doesn't really have to be about loot shooters, right? It's about, like you said, is the gameplay kind of mechanics about something that is, driving you to keep kind of playing, right? To have a high level of replayability, because that's where the differentiation occurs, right? Because in a traditional game, your focus is trying to figure out, the acts, the characters, the story arc, right? But in a lot of ways, right, these loot-based games, you're playing for partially that, but you're also playing for something else entirely, right? You're playing literally for the mechanics and the experience of how that affects how you play the game, the environment, the world, and everything that kind of comes along with it.
Loot shooters are neat because they really are a cooperative experience more than a story-driven game, 100%. Like, I don't think anybody's going to argue that that you're going to play Destiny for the story as your primary reason, right? Not that the story isn't there and it's fun, but it's not what's going to keep you coming back. And these games are, as you mentioned, are designed for that live design ecosystem where you sell Destiny 2 to the user, and then they keep playing and purchasing either cosmetics or DLC over time. Now, Destiny 2 has even announced all of their content through the end of 2022. So there's no Destiny 3 coming anytime soon, right? They've just said, hey, we're working on this content to go on for an extended period of time. And I am not caught up on the DLC. I need to jump in and play through that in the near future. But clearly they've got a strong fan base, and they were even able to break free of Blizzard Activision and kind of go independent again, which is something truly impressive because we don't see that happen too often in the gaming industry. And they're doing their thing. They're doing it at their pace. They're releasing enough content to keep the community happy. And, I think they've added some more class branches. The way the class system works in loot shooters tends to be more linear than what we get in Diablo. But like you said, a lot of that flavor comes from, okay, I'm going to run these 2 or 3 guns in my loadout, right? And then I'm going to run with this style of grenade. And there's some cool synergy that happens with this mod that creates the play style that I find to be the most fun for AoE damage or single target damage or whatever. And that's kind of where you're building your flavor.
Yeah, that's where I think that's one of the game titles where I'm usually not kind of pessimistic type of mindset, but that's where I was disappointed with Avengers, right? Because it's it actually has a lot of loot mechanics in there, but I didn't see that experiential kind of change where when you jumped in, that it wasn't really more just about kind of increasing your stat, right? So it's the same overall kind of damage or area of attack or whatever. There wasn't that kind of sense of hey, where's my cosmetic changes? Where's my kind of gameplay experience changes to kind of my power set, right? Or my load types, right? Where, again, I go back to something like the Outriders, where it looks like that team is really looking at, hey, we want you to make sure that if you change the loadout, if you change the weaponry, if you do these different things, every time you do this, you can feel like you're approaching the game in an entirely different way, right? And that also brings the bigger conversation that it forces you to maybe kind of have that interest into saying, I want to play maybe a different character because I want to see what that experience might be like if I approach that character and their, skill tree set, their kind of loot combinations, right? And what that ultimately kind of plays out to be.
Interesting. Yeah, that's game sounds really interesting. There's a lot of this genre is getting quite saturated. I mean, we could mention Path of Exile as being a really big fan favorite. Magic Legends, that's another one where Magic Legends is taking a different approach, just kind of giving anyone a brief rundown as to what it is. It's Magic the Gathering world where it's part of that multiverse, and you're playing a planeswalker. So there's currently one for each color. There's one planeswalker for each color, and then your abilities are a deck. And I think that you equip 16 different abilities. And the way the game works, and I mean those are your spells, and there's different costs and there's limitations as to how many creature spells you can have and how many action spells you can have, and so on. And you're creating this whole rotation of abilities because you only have 4 that are available at a time. But your spells randomly rotate. So it's not just I'm casting 4 spells all the time. It's I have these 16 spells that I'm working between, and you're summoning a horde of beasts around you. So if you like the Necromancer gameplay where you're summoning an army, that's what this is all about. I mean, if you're playing, white, you're going to be kind of a healer, but you could actually play white and black where you're basically a Necromancer. You're summoning the dead. You're doing all this life leeching. You're healing your party at the same time. So
Man, I'm running a green deck, and I'm gonna have an army of squirrels, man.
Yeah.
Let me tell you,
Goblin decks.
my squirrel deck. That's where it was at.
Yeah, there's that's going to be a thing and this is kind of bringing that flavor to an action RPG. Now, this game I got to play it at PAX East last year. Really fun, fluid gameplay, beautiful game, gorgeous. But they got a lot of negative feedback because there was no loot. There was no armor. There was no loot at all. It was literally just grind, build your deck, and play and get that. And they've actually gone back and said, okay, we're giving you guys loot and cosmetics and all that. So it's going to be interesting. It goes in open beta in March. So we'll be sure to tune in and, maybe we'll do a stream with it in the future. What else is on the horizon? I mean, we've mentioned a couple loot shooters. We've mentioned Magic. Oh, we have a question from chat. What's a good mouse for action RPGs? I think that's really preference, because action RPGs are, you're not going to need like a full MMO mouse. There's not like enough buttons to justify that. I would personally go with a Gladius myself, the Gladius 2 or Gladius 3, the new one.
I'd say I'd say definitely. I think you're right. I think, you don't necessarily need that many buttons. I'd say, Gladius 2 is a solid hit, or the Curious, right?
The Curious
is
wireless.
Really good choice.
You want a wireless?
There's some interesting stuff that you could do also with the Chakram, right? I think depending.
I was going to say, I think to Chakram, I'll disagree and say that I like to have in an ARPG and Diablo, like I like to assign things to my mouse buttons, just because, especially the more abilities in a game that you have, it just really opens up that possibility without having to start reassigning keyboard buttons that may already be assigned to something else, or having these weird, I need to stretch my index finger way over to hit something. I started on like World of Warcraft was probably the first game where I was like, okay, I need a mouse with more buttons on it. And ever since then, like if I don't have at least 4 additional buttons on my mouse, I'm going, well, now what am I, where am I going to assign, this quick action to?
With WoW, I've got the scroll wheel button macro, scroll wheel up, down, center click with shift as a modifier. I mean, if you don't actually have an MMO mouse, it actually gets to be a struggle with a game like WoW. But
especially if you're trying to tank or something.
Yeah. And if you do want to kind of go crazy, I mean, just keep in mind, guys, we will have the Spatha X. It's coming up soon. It's going to be an awesome replacement to the Spatha. So if you do need a lot of buttons, we'll get you covered there.
I'm excited about that. I've been waiting for us to release an update to that, because I need buttons. For my mice, I need buttons. For my PC, I need screens. Screens and buttons, man. Yeah, that's what it is.
I think going back to your question as far as kind of some other things that are kind of coming up, I think, like I said, I'm most excited, I think, about Outriders, but I think another interesting one, even though I'm not a fan of, I think, kind of battle royale, kind of large kind of gameplays, Scavengers is also kind of pretty interesting. I know that's kind of coming up, and that's going to be, I think, 60 players, and it's PvP and PvE. So it kind of has the interesting kind of experiential element between that, and I think that you have kind of the RPG elements, because the upgrades work while you're in map, right? So you can upgrade the character during essentially your session, right? And so that changes kind of that progression of kind of the core experience during your kind of run through time, right? So I think that looks kind of interesting.
I'm
personally, I'm looking forward to some DLC for Borderlands 3.
Okay.
I often, when a game comes out like that, I'll play it, I'll conquer it, and get it to where I'm happy with it, and then kind of wait for them to start putting out all the DLC, so I can go back and kind of tackle it all at once. But we haven't really talked a lot about Borderlands, and it's one of my favorite titles, period.
One or two. What was the one that really hooked you?
The original, the first one. That was what really drew me in, because I liked the Diablo-esque elements of the loot. I thought that really drew me to it. It was one of the first shooters I played, probably the first shooter I played that really had loot in that same Diablo style. But also the gameplay is really fun, and the story I really enjoyed. It had an intriguing,
quirky
kind of what's the vault, got to get in there and stuff. But the writing and the voice acting in that game, hands down, one of my favorite experiences. I love going back and replaying these games. It's like going back and watching an old favorite movie or something. Just like Scooter telling me to catch a ride. Like, I just
personalities,
love that
the quotes. It's very quotable. The psychos,
it feels alive.
even
it
just the
feels like I'm in
enemies,
this
like you
world.
know the random lines they say, like when you shoot an enemy, like
Shooty McShoot face.
shoot me in the face,
Shoot me in the face. Shoot me. Okay. Like I can't play that game and not have a good time. Even if, you know, I'm going through and I'm grinding at the end game to get some weapons or whatever. Like it puts a smile on my face and I have fun with it, which is something that I think gets lost a lot of times in games. And even for me, like I'll be playing games. I play Rocket League a lot, and sure, the game's fun, but I also get real, like, you know, into it and competitive. And it's like, oh, I missed that shot. Oh, bummer. Like when I'm playing a shooter like Borderlands, that you know they take the same elements of competitiveness and put a lighthearted spin on it.
Yeah.
It's
it's full
really
cooperative.
magical time.
It's full cooperative.
Yeah.
It's feel good with your friends. Like we're all trying to accomplish something together, and that is as someone who, you know, comes from an esports background, more and more I'm appreciating just chilling and just like unwinding,
Right.
not try harding in Valorant every night. Like once in a while I want to, right? But not every day. But
and yeah, it's the kind of game that it's fun, and then the loot just adds to the fun as if you're not approaching it from a grinding perspective, which I really in Borderlands try not to. I did a little bit in 3 just because I was like, you know, it was very popular at the time. And it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna do, you know, these mayhem modes and stuff, and like let's do it. But for the most part, it just adds that like, ooh, I got a new piece of loot. Like let's go see how that fit. I'm gonna go shoot with this gun and see how it does. And it's just another thing that honestly puts a smile on my face. It's like, hey, I'm excited about it. I'm not sad that I didn't get some drop that I could have looked up and seen that this boss may have dropped. I just kind of go into it blind and just have fun with it. And especially if you're doing a cooperative experience with friends. I think Borderlands is just one of those games that I've played them all solo. I've played them all with people, and it's so much more fun and rewarding to play with other people.
A group.
And
but I think that's the interesting thing.
AJ?
I think that's the interesting thing, though. You nailed there, is that they made the game exist in both of those facets, right? That they made it work in a single player narrative that you could immerse yourself into the writing, the world design, the character design, which creates an affinity and affection for the game in an entirely different way than when you play a game purely from a grinding mechanic or purely from a competitive standpoint. You will grow to enjoy the experience in an entirely different way. And I think that this is also what kind of I was talking about earlier in kind of game design, where if you don't have a strong voice from the design team at really kind of defining a look and feel and even a narrative, even if that narrative tone isn't, I think, resident within kind of like a strong story, right? So example would be Destiny. There's still kind of an overriding narrative that's present, right, within the world and the design, enough to kind of make you feel that there's something else that's there that you can connect to, right? When it kind of just gets so generalized, like example might be something like Warzone, right? It's like you're only playing Warzone to purely play from a competitive standpoint,
Pretty
right?
much,
You're purely playing
for the placement. That's it.
Yeah. So, and I don't think, and that's why, you know, the criticisms or the experience ends up being so many times there about balancing, about kind of maps, and about you know, loadouts, and so many kind of things that the moment those things get changed, it entirely changes other thing. But when you have other things that you can kind of dive into and appreciate, it balances out that you're almost willing to be more accepting of maybe if the loot system isn't entirely perfect because the world design is really cool and it's interesting, right? Or that the writing helps to make up for another aspect, right? So it gets back into that the core gameplay experience is really positive. And the only other way to, I think, circumvent that focus is that you have to then go even more simplified in the game, which is the reason why like historical titles like something like Tetris or something like that, people will always keep playing it because the mechanics are so simple that I care about the pure mechanism of just wanting to play something, right? So that's, I think, the interesting thing that we're seeing right now with some of these newer titles is they're kind of trying to figure out how much do you have to kind of craft, develop, and kind of make work so that you can create an affinity and a connection that you want to maintain the investment, especially if you're supposedly going to drive the game as a games of service, right, type of experience. Because I think that long term, if you don't have something more that you can kind of bite into, even if kind of these things keep getting rolled out, what is your real connection to want to keep doing it, right?
For the loot is a good excuse for a little while, but you're right. Like and coming back time and again, especially if the loot gets rebalanced, like if my favorite gun, and it's my favorite thing that I've been working on, it got nerfed, and that was what was bringing me joy from that game,
And that's
then
where we
I've
see
lost that kind of joy.
a lot of these games made or break, you know, because when I find that when you go and you balance a gun and you nerf a gun, that's the worst feeling in the world. If anybody worked hard specifically for an item and then you're lessening its value, that's bad. That's bad. And we're seeing these studios learn that. So instead of nerfing guns, what the approach has become is more like, okay, we're just going to add in new, better things. So then they're balancing that gun, but then there's something new to work towards. So you have something great that you're happy with that you achieved. And then they're now adding in new stuff into the pool that gives you something to work towards. But I just think loot systems in general are still not perfectly figured out. I mean, we can talk about Diablo 3 as we did, but then you look at the, you know, some of these other games like Borderlands 3, in my opinion, there's just too much loot. It's exhausting. Like everywhere. It's just like legendary. I know, but it's just like, it's like exhausting. I don't even get excited anymore because of like, you know, you want to see that orange box drop on the ground and be like, oh, I got a legendary. And you want that, like that big moment. And when it's just so constant, to me, that takes away. I really like felt tired of seeing loot in Borderlands 3, which is a weird problem to have.
I think you're right. That was the thing. Borderlands 2 was the first one where they're like, we have over, you know, however many billion
but
gun
Borderlands 2's balance
possible.
for guns was perfect. It was perfect. Like
they just ramped it. They were like, well, we gotta outdo that. Yeah, and you're right. Yeah. It does. I mean, so many guns, just, you know, you go through and wipe out some people and there's just like stuff popping up. And it's like, do I even need, no, I'm leaving, you know, rare legendary items just around because it's like, I already got 2 of that one and it's not that great.
That's where Diablo does a really good job because they create those special events where then suddenly loot's popping out everywhere. It's like you found a special, you found the cow level, and then the cow level is just the cow level flooding you with loot, and that's cool, right? That feels like
goblins.
A random event that you're excited about. But
yeah, that's
there definitely has to be a balance between having too much loot and not enough loot, because if you're playing all day and you didn't get a single thing that even sparked your interest, then and loot is a large portion of the gameplay mechanic, the gameplay loop, then you failed. But at the same time, you're right. If after every single encounter you've got a legendary piece of equipment and 100 dozens of rares just laying around, you're like, well, it's just as bad as not getting anything because you've gotten everything you want, or just too much to sort through.
Then you're spending all this time
the game
reading. Yeah, you're reading and like disenchanting it or whatever, like salvaging
comparing stats. It's like, well, I guess I can get an extra couple DPS, but I'll have to sacrifice some accuracy. It's just like, I don't want to have to think about it that much. There's definitely a delicate balance because there's complexity that's necessary, but you can go too far in both directions.
AJ?
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I mean, I think I'm always going to favor more loot than less loot. I think it really comes back to, again, how it affects the overall experience, right? A lot of these things started to occur when there was a lot more kind of machine learning and procedural generation that was occurring. So you were seeing kind of things get scaled out, but they didn't necessarily have, I think, direct kind of heavy game implications, right? I don't think that people would have really a question of saying that there's a lot of loot, or being negative about that there's too much loot, if the loot inherently has the ability to really change the experience. But the problem is, if you give me 200 variants of, I don't know, a shotgun, and the fundamental experience is roughly the same across all of them, then do I need 200 shotguns? No, right? So what it really comes down to is that, can you give me a large enough quantity that makes me feel that there's merit into not only getting that loot, but then actually equipping it so that I can try something out and see, does that make me, again, change the overall experience, right? It gets back to that cosmetic and gameplay kind of change, right? One, I want to hopefully see that it looks different. And then two, I want to actually, do I notice it, right? Do I feel like, oh man, this actually changes how I want to actually spray this out, how I want to position myself, if I want to strafe, or if I want to do this, or like you said, is it, is it more area of effect, or is it kind of more melee focused? Whatever it might be. And I think that's kind of the challenge, is that the best ones tend to reward you that even if there's a lot of loot, you get rewarded for playing around with a lot of these combinations, right? And even if the combination is somewhat extreme, right? Let's say you totally suck at defensive because you've totally spec'd yourself out to have massive area of effect attacks, right? That's entirely okay, because it might be really fun to just play the game like that for a little while, right?
Absolutely. You just want to
do that, right?
You want to show your friends like some crazy build, and they're like, "What is this?" Like, that's really fun to just be like, how do I get that gun? And it's like, oh, well, it only works in this instance because otherwise it's useless or whatever. And that's finding that niche build is half the fun, I feel.
Exactly. But you got to have enough depth there, right? And I
Yeah.
think that for sure, in most situations, you can never have that depth if you have too little loot, right? Too little loot, I think, is really good at helping to reward players. And it might not be the bad thing overall, because there's a lot of analysis paralysis now. There's so many menus, so many structures, so many specific things in games that gamers really have to invest a huge amount of time to get good at a game, right? I mean, in most situations, especially something like fairly complex like a loot shooter, you're not going to probably walk away with a solid base understanding without at least probably dumping in 15 to 25 hours. I'd say conservatively.
Yeah.
You're going to probably be in that least kind of base thing to say, I got a sense of my character. I've got enough progression to kind of know where I'm at, kind of how the things work out, and a lot of those things. And that's a decent amount of chunk if you consider that a good quality single player narrative is somewhere between 4 to 20 plus hours, right? So you're literally telling me I could have played, like 4 games, or I could play 1 and maybe not even be entirely rewarded, right? Which I think that's an interesting kind of factor too, that kind of plays into a lot of this too.
Just kind of coming from the angle of not enough loot, I think that's something that Anthem really suffered from. Anthem is a game that that had a lot of problems, but I'm like a weird Anthem fanboy. Like, the game is not great. It hasn't succeeded for a reason, but I find it to be thematically super appealing. I just like the whole exosuit, Iron Man gameplay. The world is gorgeous,
IP strong.
Yeah, and the combat is sincerely very fun. The flying is very fun. That's about it. The actual customization and the loot and the lack of an inventory system. There is no inventory system. There is no going into your menu during a run. Like, there's just so many things that are core to what that experience is supposed to be that are missing. And so the interesting thing about Anthem, and what we'll leave you with for Anthem, is that they're actually having a meeting this week to determine the fate of Anthem 2.0. BioWare has been going through a lot of different stuff. A year ago, Casey Hudson announced that Anthem was going to be rebooted. They have a team of about 24 people that are working on completely overhauling the game. And basically the word is that EA is deciding this week whether or not Anthem is going to be scrapped or it's going to get additional resources. So it's one or the other.
Right.
They're going all out.
The director left, right?
Casey Hudson got pulled to Dragon Age. He got pulled to Dragon Age.
I'm okay with.
Well,
yeah,
I'm not, but
Dragon Age.
So I believe it was Casey Hudson. I might be misspeaking as to who went where, but somebody got pulled to Dragon Age. 2 people left BioWare, and the game lead on an Anthem got pulled to Dragon Age, which is a lateral move for them. So congrats. But there is so EA is either going to say we're doing more, we're like investing even more resources to salvage this game, or we're just abandoning it. And I'm personally
the sunk cost fallacy.
I know I want them to do it justice, because the world and the combat and the way flight feels is really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else like it out there too. I think if they can put in the effort to get those kind of missing pieces, like you said, the IP, the world design, some of the gameplay mechanisms, right? Those things are unique, and I think they're strong enough to reward investment and to maintain a good, really solid player base. The question is, right, can you get there, right? I think that's the big thing. But the good thing is, it's not like you can easily say, well, I can find this quote unquote similar experience by just flipping over to this other game, right? So I think that means that there was a lot of stuff that was done right in the very beginning, but it shows you that kind of that full experience needs to be improved upon. Yeah,
I would say the experience itself was disjointed. It felt like 2 teams made the game and they merged different elements. Like, it was very, very weird going from this super fluid third person exosuit flying around the world to this human in first person moving incredibly slow. It just didn't feel right. But we are winding down in terms of time for this show. Any other things we might have missed that you guys wanted to, any other games or honorable mentions?
Someone mentioned this in chat, and it's a very good point. And I think one of the most essential parts of a good loot-based game, looter shooter, Diablo-esque ARPG, is a decent inventory management system. And honestly, this stretches across any game where you pick up any amount of loot. I hate playing inventory management the game.
Oh god.
I hate having to sit and think in the middle of a combat or just like exiting combat, but far from wherever I would deal with my loot. I would sell it, I would, trash it, craft it, whatever. And just having to sit there and stop. Everything I'm doing, all the progress I'm making, all the fun I'm having, and I have to stop because I got that little warning. I have too much in my inventory, I'm going slow, or I can't pick up this thing that I want to get, and then I have to stop and think about it. And I think that...
But does that make you, though...
That's just an essential thing. No, go for it, JJ.
I 100% agree with you. Inventory management is like 100% critical and super important, but sometimes like forcing you to purge forces you to purge, right?
It's true, but
You know what I mean?
I more mean when it's a frequent occurrence.
It's gotta be there's a fine line, I feel, and I think having progression on inventory size is nice, something that makes you feel good. Of now I have greater capacity, stuff to work towards with your character. I've reached this threshold where now I'm better at XYZ. All of that feels really good.
For sure.
I feel like I just always end up keeping, it's like, well, I've got this item that I think I might use and this item, and then it's to the point where it's like I have enough room in my inventory to pick up like 3 things on a run because my bag is just loaded down with stuff that I think I might use.
Now we have to write
to me being the issue and having
but I think you're right. That gets back to inventory management, right? So it's like if the inventory system allows for something like a quote unquote off character inventory hold, right? So it's like, your larger chest of holding, right?
Your bank alt
into that you can go back to later and go like, hey, I don't need this right now always on me, but I can then go back here and then access it. That's kind of the best of both worlds, right? And we've seen that, and of course the best type of true RPGs always have some type of inventory management where it's like the character isn't limited to just what they can hold. They've always got a secondary repository where I can put X piece, especially if there's, crafting or kind of more.
Yeah, Diablo has all that.
Other stuff like that, right? But you're 100% right that if you have a weak inventory system and weak inventory management system, it's gonna really hobble the overall experience, especially because it's gonna be something that you're gonna be dealing with so consistently that it's gonna take away from you wanting to play the game.
It was something I ran into with Borderlands where the third one, I had several pack mule characters where I maxed out their inventory. I played through enough just to max them out because in the course of playing, especially in the end game, I would get these loot pieces where it's like, oh, this gun's amazing, but it's not for this character.
So this is where I wish Borderlands learned from a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, where your horse has a satchel on it, or there's inventory on your vehicle, because in Borderlands you always have a vehicle, like almost always. So if your vehicle somehow worked as a bank for depositing gear, that would be really nice. I just feel like that would be an organic way to do it. Destiny lets you use a third party. You can go on the website and you can literally drag gear out of your inventory to a different character in Destiny 2 from browser.
That's so
live.
Cool.
You can just swap gear back and forth. And that's just API. Just
offload your inventory management to when you're not playing the game.
You can do it on your phone. You can do it in browser. Yeah. It's cool. You can do it live while playing, and it's instant. So APIs are sometimes the answer. So it's interesting. It is definitely a critical component for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool,
so
guys.
What's everybody gonna be playing this week?
Oh man, I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 right now. Actually, that's my current.
Probably
pleasure.
back to Cyberpunk. Honest.
Oh yeah. How about you, JJ?
Trying to get through it.
Man, I think I want to try out. I mean, I'm going back and forth between about 5 or 6 things right now because I'm a completionist, so I don't like to jump on something until I kind of complete that. But I like to be able to kind of go from, depending on how much bandwidth I have. All of us, you're working for ASUS, you have limited bandwidth, so you got to kind of play based on the amount of time that you have available, right? But there's a cool kind of indie kind of platformer. It's called I think Elijah that just kind of came out that looks really cool. I'd like to be able to jump into it. And I think the campaign's the story, it's only 4 hours. So it's a perfect kind of thing that I could sit, play it, almost complete it, and kind of have an enjoyable experience without being super complicated. But the combat mechanics, even for an indie platform, are done, I think, really well that I've looked at it. That positionally really well done. And I like the art style. So probably going to try that out.
Sounds interesting. Nice. Yeah, for me, I'm honestly just looking forward to BlizzConline, where it's going to be February 19th and 20th. That's when we'll find out what other classes. Hopefully, we'll at least learn 1 or 2 more classes for Diablo. Right now, it's Barbarian, Sorceress, and Druid confirmed. I believe they said the game is going to ship with 5 or 6 classes total, and that's it. So we assume there will be. Well, there's got to be some kind of ranged physical damage class. So is it going to be Demon Hunter, which is only in Diablo 3, or is it going to be maybe Amazon? I don't know. There's a few different routes that could go. But we are actually going to do in a few weeks. We're going to do a show recapping BlizzConline, diving into Diablo 4 and any other announcements. We're just expecting Diablo 4 news. We don't know that there will be, but I'd be shocked if we didn't get something, since that's what everybody's looking forward to. Overwatch 2, maybe we'll get some news there. Who knows? There's a lot of things on the horizon for BlizzConline, so look forward to a recap of that in the future. JJ, what do you got coming up?
Man, we've got our weekly streams that we do on the PCDIY Facebook group, so always working on that. And game wise, I'm probably most excited for new Warhammer. So there's a new Warhammer Total War and Dark Tide. Dark Tide's gonna be so awesome.
I know.
But I'm a huge Warhammer fan, both fantasy and 40K, so I'm super stoked for that. But yeah, if you guys want to talk about hardware, we do a lot of hardware coverage, and we got a great group, so you guys can come check us out.
Chris, what's on your plate? What's next for you?
Literally, as we've been sitting here, it was right before we went live. I was telling JJ I checked because I have some motherboards coming in, because I'm going to be unboxing our new Z590 boards, and those just arrived on my doorstep as we've been talking. So my wife grabbed them. They're not just sitting out in the cold anymore. But that's I got to open up and play with these Z590 boards and check them out. And then I'm also going to be working on a white build. That's going to be real exciting, using one of the Z590 boards, the Prime, and really excited about that. So stay tuned. We'll be seeing some of that in the next couple weeks.
Great. Very cool. Yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff coming up as well. Right now, it's been high refresh rate gaming for me. I've been playing on the G17, showing off 300 hertz gaming, and very soon we're going to get some 360 hertz gaming on the live stream.
So the RLA.
Yeah. So
nice. Hey, on that journey to 1,000 hertz, man.
I know. Well, I don't know if we'll hit to 1,000, but
trust me, we're on our way, man. You haven't seen anything until you see 400, 480. We're on our way to 1,000, man.
The human eye can't see past 60, I thought.
Insert me.
No.
I do think there is an actual study that says the maximum that benefits the human eye is like 540, but I could be making that up.
I'm excited to get to a point where we finally say no, we can't see any more than this.
Well,
in an approvable manner.
It was BMW. It was BMW that actually said that in their screens in their cars, it's like in the 500 range. They're like nice. After this point, it's just there's no benefit anymore. That's a whole nother topic.
But we've heard that before, so.
Yeah, you're right. The future is bright and nice and fluid
and fast.
All right, friends. Well, thank you all for tuning into SideQuest as we dove in and just talked about action RPGs and nerded out. There's a lot of cool stuff on the horizon. We'll have many more shows covering this topic again in different capacities in the future. We'll see you next time. GG's and take care.